there for quite some time, actually, about over 10 years, actually, and really am attracted to and love open source. And you'll see some details, and as I share them, I don't think that I've contributed nearly enough to open source, but I'm going to share some of that with you. And I think I sent kind of in the description kind of, have I contributed, yes or no? And we're going to kind of talk about that today. And I'm going to share some additional resources with you guys too that have just helped me in understanding kind of the larger trend and the wave of open source, which I think is huge in the world, and I love it. So that's me. I'm primarily Python, JavaScript. I got thrown into statistics and software, which is how I like to refer to AI and machine learning, artificial intelligence and machine learning. I actually prefer, for AI as an acronym, I actually prefer automated inference to refer to AI. But I got thrown into that actually quite some time ago now, probably about 6+ years ago, 6, 7, 8+ years ago, and have been doing kind of natural language processing, statistical model building, some, but have worked in that area now for about 8, 9 years. Actually, the years keep going by. So that's a little about me. I'm primarily a Python JavaScript guy, software architecture guy for a long time, and got thrown into the AI and machine learning, natural language processing specifically, about like 8 or 9 years ago. So with that, I love the fact that we shared kind of our programming languages and stuff coming into this. I'm gonna like kind of dive into open source. Precious, is there anything else we want to do to kick us off here? Okay, I'm gonna share my screen, and I don't have like a presentation that I'm just gonna preach at you. I have websites that I'm gonna share with you, right? So with that, feel free. I'm gonna try to monitor the chat here and see what's going on, but hit me with questions, and we can kind of take this in a route that is most beneficial to you. So um, I'm gonna start by sharing a blank screen on my computer, and then go into a website that I love. So this is a Python user interface project called Python Panel. And I want to share this because it's personally very relevant for me, and it is a very large open source project. And I want to kind of share my experiences with it, and kind of like introduce it to you guys as kind of I don't know, a lens, right, to like view open source through. And then I'm gonna just talk about my experience on the project. All right. So here's the project out here. It's got 4,000 stars, right? It's been forked 440 times. It's actually sponsored by a company, right? Which is an interesting question mark when you get into open source about which of the open source projects are actually backed by companies. And in the case of Python Panel, it is uh, it's backed by I think it's down here. Yeah, Anaconda. If any of you guys are have backgrounds in Python, particularly Python for like artificial intelligence and machine learning stuff, data science. Anaconda has really focused in that industry for quite some time. I have, to be honest, I have never really been much of an Anaconda user at all. I've been more in the pure vanilla camp. Anaconda had started with their build packages around Conda in order to bring in dependencies. And I really don't use Conda really at all. In fact, I've got a little story about it that I'll share as I go down into the details of like getting started in like an open source project. But Anaconda has been around for quite some time in the open source community, particularly in the data science realm in Python. But interesting, right to the right of them is a company you may not have heard of, but is kind of a big deal. This is a big company in finance, actually, um, and they are huge in terms of assets under management and in traditional finance. I saw somebody mentioned Web3 and blockchain technologies, I think, in the chat. So kind of the other side of that with what they call TradFi or traditional finance, you've got this company called Blackstone that is a big, big, big deal. And it's interesting that they would be backing or helping or sponsoring an open source project like this, which I just stumbled on this probably a bit over a year ago, year and a half ago or so. I was actually introduced to this project panel by my partner in the company I work in called Cyber Context, which is focused on cybersecurity and natural language processing. But the fact that Blackstone was a sponsor of this project, I thought was really, really unique. So it's one of those interesting things that is kind of maybe a little unusual sometimes when it comes to open source. And that is, are there these big companies behind the open source? And if so, why? And obviously, we've seen more of that over the years, as we've seen um, Microsoft purchased GitHub about 10, 8 years ago ish kind of time frame. Um, and um, and they obviously are the backers of VS Code. Um, and that I'm sure, how many people we got VS Code users? Give me a thumbs up on that if you're a VS Code user out there, like versus not. I'm imagining there's a bunch. Yeah. So the idea of this kind of corporate relationship with open source is a really interesting fact. And there's one other thing I want to share with you about this kind of corporate kind of relationship to open source, and that is what a guy named Joseph Jacks calls um, commercial open source software. And let's look that up real quick with him. But what he's referring to there, I love it. All the claps and thumbs up. I assume that's like the VS Code side. That is absolutely, it's just taken the world by storm. If any of you have been around in the industry for some time, you might be familiar with another IDE that was actually created by um, uh, GitHub originally, called Atom, before they bought. Is this him? I don't think this is him. Oh yeah, this is him. And I wanted to share this picture with you. Um, but they had Atom as an IDE in GitHub, right, before VS Code, and they were actually developed before Microsoft acquired GitHub, right? And Microsoft worked on VS Code, which was actually somewhat, I think, a fork of Atom. I know it was built on the same stack, which is the JavaScript Electron stack for like thick client or fat client applications. But after the acquisition, right, of GitHub by Microsoft, it became very clear that, hey, you know what, something's got to happen here, in terms of Atom as an editor versus VS Code. And the obvious kind of direction was that VS Code was just going, and VS Code had already achieved quite a bit of traction in the marketplace by then too, but VS Code just completely like overtook Atom, and eventually I think it's actually deprecated now, but you have to look up the details on that. So another example of like corporate interests, right? Microsoft in that way in terms of open source, and obviously the big players. Um, uh, Facebook and what they've been doing with like Llama, right, in the AI large language model space, and open source large language models. Google, in terms of their open source contributions, which has always been big. I'm going to talk a little bit about. I'm sure you guys, many of you are familiar with Google's Summer of Code, um, and I'm going to mention that a little bit and share a link with you, and obviously Microsoft that I was just talking about with the VS Code side. So with that, one last point I'll make. This guy, his view of the world is that we have now entered, over the past 14 years, we've entered into this huge trend, right, related to commercial open source software. And they back open source software like Cal.com, that kind of is a Calendly competitor, or like a calendar for ad hoc calendar scheduling. Primarily, it's used in sales, but it can use to open up your calendar to other people to like put in a meeting request. But another one that I've just used recently in the past couple of years, excuse me, a couple of weeks actually, like past 2 weeks, I've used it. Is this one called Documenso, and I want to share this one with you because they have it's a DocuSign competitor or e-signature competitor. And this is related to an open source project that I have going on right now that I actually got some help with on Tublian. If there's anybody who contributed to that with me, definitely throw me a clap or something. But they have a list out here of their OSS friends. And this, you can see cal.com listed here. Many of these are backed by OSS Capital. And these are all open source projects, right? That have intertwined kind of the need for open source and open GitHub repositories. And obviously there's questions about the license of what open source is, but they've intertwined that with the commercial aspect of it and creating something that is sustainable, such as a software as a service on top of it, like cal.com or Documenso does, offering some freemium options to get people started in it, right? But blending that open source and commercial, or what that guy Joseph Jacks and his OSS Capital calls commercial open source software. So that's kind of my intro into open source and talking about that. With that, I have a couple other like topics I want to share with you and like personal experiences. So let's go back to this panel thing. So this is actually very recent for me, but just in the past week or so, I was actually trying to do the developer guide in Panel, which is what I have up on the screen here. And there are some great resources. I'm going to drop the link in the chat for you guys. But the videos, if you have not seen these, how to get started with contributing to open source video, which is right here, 14 minutes long. You can watch it on 2x, whatever, is an excellent resource in terms of getting started, kind of the importance of diving into the repository, the importance of the documentation, the importance of evaluating kind of the community, right, that is already involved, and being slow and intentional, right, about how you engage in that community, right? So a lot of projects will use things like like a good first issue, right? Label on their projects, right? This is really important as you come into the issues. Here, I'll clear the filters on it. As you come into it, the issues on a project and you go over to the labels, any really active kind of project will have this good first issue. You can see there's 34 out here right now on Python Panel for the UI. And this is a great place to get started. But this is like where you get started after you've already kind of evaluated, begun reading the documentation, forked the repository, began to like tinker with it locally as a user, right? And then come in here to like a good first issue and find one and start a dialogue, start a conversation about it, find what they really wanted to achieve, see if you can strike up a conversation to see if you can fit to understand their objectives and find where it might fit into the project that you can contribute to. So I think that and this is actually fairly new for me to like see this good first issue being used so much. I think that is one of the most critical pieces of advice that I could receive, right, and share about contributing to this kind of open source project. So how do you add those labels? So when you add an issue, you're going to have an option to be able to add the labels to the projects, and GitHub already makes suggestions, right, on those types of labels that you can add. And I think this is my BlockuSign, sign documents, kind of issues, and R6, and then new issues. And then down here, you've got labels over here on the right, you know, that you can associate with the project. And you can see like good first issues is something that GitHub recommends to people as a label. So let's go back to kind of the panel developer guide. and the videos that they suggested here. There are three in order, right? One was this one, how to get started with contributing to open source. Highly recommend this one. You got to get into it. It's really good. And the next one is contributing to open source projects as a new Python developer. Now, I know not everybody here is a Python developer. I saw Rust, I saw Go, I saw TypeScript and JavaScript on the list. I know that there's a lot of other like programming languages represented here. That said, what I really pulled out of this video, and if you have the time, like take a listen to it. What I really pulled out of this video was the focus on the relationships and the dialogue, like I mentioned before, that you want to have with the people in the community. You really want to understand their goals, their objectives, how the change that you might see, right? You might have a vision for, or you might even be basing that vision on another open issue that somebody marked as a good first issue, for example, to be able to focus in on what their goals are and to start that dialogue. And in this video, this guy talks about even sideline communities, right? Where you start to create a squad, if you will. That's my terminology for it. But you start to create a community of like-minded individuals that are trying to help one another, that ends up being even more of a safe place, right? To be able to have the dialogue and have the discussion about what the goals are and what you're trying to achieve, and trying to help one another in achieving those. So that's kind of like the baseline, right, that I wanted to share. And I kind of wanted to jump from an existing open source project, Python Panel, which is highly documented, right, and is introducing us, right, to these preliminaries, right, which is these videos that I just shared with you. The third one here is a blog post, actually, which is pretty good too. And I love, like, let me see if I can grab the quote from that blog post pretty quick. But there's one quote in it in particular, which it just starts off with, which I love, that we're all driven by a desire to contribute to something like bigger than ourselves. And I think that really it's really heady, right? It's really kind of up in the sky, like thought, a big thought, a philosophical thought. But I really like it as kind of the core kind of motivating factor of why do we even do this in terms of open source. And granted, that's not everybody's motives all the time, right? And that's okay. But there is a deep drive, right, in us to contribute to something that's bigger than ourselves, and to see it out in the world and contributing to other people, where other people are getting value from it and other people are finding it useful. So with that, I was going to kind of just connect those to kind of the basics of open source, right? What is it to contribute to open source, right? Well, the first thing to contribute to open source is to just go out here and um, actually say, create a repo, right? Because when you create a repo, you are contributing, right, to open source. Now, granted, it might just be you and it might be no one else. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. This stuff is hard, right? Software is more about communication and clearly identifying, communicating, sharing goals, right? In your requirements and ultimately in what you're delivering from a software development and software architecture perspective. And that communication is what makes software very difficult. So contributing to open source and starting an open source project, while it might be easy to set up a GitHub repository, and it might be easy to start adding a set of requirements and a set of milestones as issues in that GitHub repository. And it might be easy to like fork a starting project, to-do list, or hello world. It is not easy, right, to point multiple people, right, in the same direction around that software project. And that's what makes software challenging, and what makes open source software, I think, challenging, especially challenging. So how do you start? You start by creating a repo. how do you contribute to other projects? You start by reading their repository. You start by reading their documentation. You start by using their application and their code. You start by dialoguing and communicating with the people that are already contributing to the project in a way that is helpful to them. And in one of those videos that I shared with you, it was about having a conversation with them and being willing to do the work that other people just aren't really have the time or the energy to do. And that would be documenting typos. And this gets into my like experience with open source, where the question about have I contributed to open source? Well, you know, I took a React course um, that was, I think it's front end devs bin. We'll see if it's out here. I actually don't have the link right off to share, and so I don't know that it's going to be easy for me to find. But we'll take a look and see if we can find it in terms of activity, because it was a long time ago. But there was a React course I took, and the guy had a typo right in his course, which he had a GitHub repository on. And yeah, it's gonna be in here somewhere, like with Ben probably. No, I don't see it. Oh, it would have been like at least a couple years ago. And the typo was just a pull request, right? I actually experienced on one of those open source projects that I was just sharing with you that is backed by OSS Capital on the Documenso friend base, friends page. One of those had a typo, and I was able to do a pull request on that, like actually from my phone, which is not very easy to do if you've ever tried to use GitHub like on your phone to actually like edit a file, for example, in the online IDE and IDE editor. So those are those contributions? Absolutely they are, man. And we all like should look for those because that's what the larger community is about in terms of contributing back to open source. Now, when you get down into like a very large code base, like for example, like the panel side, they'll end up having things like the discussions like separated. So you might have, in this case, Python panel has discourse. Actually, I had it open out here to share. Let me see if I can find that and drag it over. Yeah, yeah, like this, where the discourse is available for Python panel, and there's a lot of activity out here. And I'm going to see if I can see Mark out here really quick. Here's Mark. Mark is probably the #1 contributor from a user perspective on Python panel, and does a great job out here. And the few, like very few, opportunities that I've had that I've been able to like contribute back to someone asking questions and me giving them code, because it takes time, right? Like we're not talking usually about like 5 minutes, we're talking like 30 minutes, maybe even a couple hours or whatever, like to like understand what their question is and their problem is, create a sample of the code to get the minimal kind of reproducible of what they're dealing with, and then give it back to them to show them, hey, this is how you would go about that. So in this case, the discourse is holoviz.org. This is the panel one. But that is contributing to open source. And it may not be a pull request. It might be on a discourse discussion, and it might be helping people to answer their questions. To be honest, I haven't got into kind of the regular cadence of getting and participating out here. I want to. It's probably, I guess right now it's in the once every few weeks kind of camp that I get out here. I'd like to see it a little bit more often for myself because I'm actively using this project. But that is yet another example of contributing to open source. And that, even later on, is what can bring you back to kind of this, which is the developer guide, which is setting up the project. This project is pretty darn deep. It is again a Python user interface library that is wrapping JavaScript standard components, right, and visualization components so that you can produce them and interact with them from server-side Python code. without even touching the front end, meaning the JavaScript, assuming everything works. And it's pretty deep. And in fact, when I went to do the development environment for this, I actually hit a problem with it right here on this issue of like do it with the Conda environment. And I posted out into the community, and the response that I got was really this one here, difficult running was, and I actually extended somebody else's comments even from a year ago, just under a year ago. And there's Mark again because he's awesome. But I extended it and showed him, hey, this is the problem I'm having. This is kind of why and what I did from a Conda perspective. And this guy is the other guy that's deep in the development and contributing here, and he actually works, I think, at Anaconda, where Mark does not. But he responded. He's like, "Sorry, it's in bad shape. I was hoping to clean it up, and they want to use Hatch instead of the what's called the PyCT Dev, which is their kind of bundler that is used currently, and they want to use Hatch, but they haven't done it, and he's hoping to investigate it. I haven't been able to really dig into it yet. It's a deep kind of issue, but this is just another example of the community, right? And getting involved, and you could be some distance away, right, from an actual pull request that you may never even meet, right? But you can still be involved in bettering the project, in knowing more about the project, and in helping other people on the project. And that is just as good as any pull request in terms of contributing to open source. So with that, I'm gonna bring up the link for Google Summer of Code. It is 10:33, and let's hit some questions, comments, see what you guys want to talk about. Actually, before we do that, and speaking of Google Summer of Code, I did not take a look to see there's like 58 people out here or so, but I see him, Serge. He's here. Serge, if you can get on stage real quick, I'm gonna make a comment about Google Summer of Code, and this guy, if he's got time to talk to us for a minute, there's the Google Summer of Code link, and actually it starts today. What a great time to have this conversation, right? Because I just happened to notice it is opening up on the contributor app side, and if you've got something like really specific, it's very competitive. So don't get me wrong on that, but it actually I think kicks off today, March 18th. So that's exciting to see. So with that, Serge might be tied up too. I kind of asked him last minute to show up here for the event. Good. I'd love to see that discourse being vital, contributing back. Nix packages. Nice. Max open queue for sign people. I don't know what that does. I got raised hands. Can I do something there? Precious, do you have to turn that on? Okay. Max has got his hand up. Max, go for it, man.
Yeah, less of a question, more of a comment. I was the one who was posting about discourse being vital to answering some things about NixOS back in the day. It was a very small contribution to open source. Love the topic and the conversation that's gone on this morning, by the way. Also open to work if anybody is interested in looking for someone to hire. But anywho, I just posted a link in chat because NixOS is also sponsored or part of Google's Summer of Code. It is a package manager of sorts, and back in the day, I was very eager to contribute to the open source community, and I was looking to present a few things for some talks. And the library that I ended up contributing to Nix packages was the Ruby show off library. Did very little contribution. I don't even actively support a number of the things that I ended up contributing to in NixOS, but it was a very interesting deep dive. A very large open source community surrounds this particular, well, Nix is a very broad subject. There's a package manager, the operating system, the configuration language itself, all which fly under the flag of Nix, so it can get a little bit semantically confusing at times. Um, thereby discourse being very beneficial to answering a lot of questions there. But yeah, I guess that's all I have
great.
for it.
That's great. Great example too. And like you can see like how big like this project is, right? Just like the 15,000 stars, right? And the 11,000, 12,000 almost like forks on the project. So that's awesome. That's a really great um project to have been involved in and contribute in and get involved with the community. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing, Mike. Other comments, questions? Let me check this. How do I don't know that I can open the queue and Rajiv, you got your hand up. Um, can you just
Hi,
unmute? Hello.
hi, Pete. Yeah.
Hello.
So, it was a great meeting you. Uh,
Nice meeting
uh,
you.
so, uh, yeah. So, I have a question that uh, I think the most hard part of contributing in open source is to run the repo locally in our PC. Some repos have very good documentations and some not. So, how do you deal with this part of open source? How do you
That's
run
a
the
great
projects locally?
great question. So you were asking like sometimes it's really difficult, right, to even just get the project set up and to
Yeah,
start to
yeah,
contribute, right? That's why I shared my experience, right, with the Python panel project. Because I don't have it up. Um, well, I don't have it up on my environment, right, to show, but you can kind of see it in here, right? That like I could not get past the step, right? In terms of even setting up my fork of the Python panel project, right? And this was just a week ago, right? This is 7 days ago. And so you're going to hit like roadblocks like that. And what you have to do is it's sometimes you just have to say, you know what, this is out of my control. Um, I can maybe try another route, but don't come into an open source project with expectations. That is the first piece of advice I have, right? Because open source is really about community driven, right? And it's about what you can bring into the community to help other people. So Philip was awesome in his response to me, you know, like a day later. It was awesome. And this project is really active and Philip and Mark in particular are really involved. Um, if I go into this again, right? I may try to push it a little deeper, like in terms of Anaconda and the dependencies on the Conda package. It's down in here. You can kind of see it, right? That I was using that was unavailable. But you really have to go in with the expectation of, you know what? If I hit a wall, it's okay, right? It's gonna be fine. I can I can maybe find a way around the wall. I can maybe switch directions. Maybe I go to another project. It's okay, right? But my first advice is to just come with very low. And I think actually the CEO of NVIDIA just spoke right at Stanford like just this week, um, and he said something this to to this regard just a few days ago that I listened to, which I highly recommend, and it was about how he has very low expectations. So that would be my advice about approaching a project and getting the environment running. Have low expectations. If it's working for you in achieving a goal, right? Because that's what open source is, right? They put it out in the public so that they're helping people achieve their goal. If it's working for you in achieving a goal, and now you want to try to contribute back, right? Then take it slow and take the steps, but come at it with very low expectations. Oh, my pleasure, Rajiv. Nice to meet you. Other questions, comments? We've got a few more minutes, I think. Yeah, Discord. Yeah, I tell you what, with social media can get us a lot of noise out there, right? Discord, GitHub issues, right? Let alone email and tracking those kind of personal communications, LinkedIn messages. I mean, they're everywhere, right? Let alone like Facebook and everywhere. But TikTok, if that's going to continue in the United States, we'll see. I hope it does. To take a, even though I'm not really a user, to take a position on that. Let's see. Um, you mentioned Python. What about individuals that have knowledge on React.js? Can they also contribute to the project? Must it be only Python? So it depends on the project. It's really React.js is a high need, right? In terms of user interface and user design. React.js, particularly like in TypeScript, sometimes JavaScript in React. I've had projects that I've had React and used React on that have not been open source. I haven't done much on the open source side with React, but it's a need out there. It's really evaluating kind of the fit of the project, right, and their needs to your skill in terms of TypeScript and React. React, I think, tends to like favor kind of the user interface, right? Unless you're kind of doing like a Node.js or like a Node.js Express, or I saw somebody earlier talked about the MERN stack, the Vercel's Next.js environment, or throw Vue.js in there and do like Nuxt, right? The Jamstack stuff. If you're familiar with these terms, um, it's all about like finding the right fit, right? In terms of the technologies and what the goal of the projects are. Actually, the BlockUsign one that I shared there, is out under me. That is Next.js project. So so that's React and Next.js, and it was built on, I think I built it on the sample of what used to be called NextAuth. I think it's called Auth.js now, for provider, authentication provider. Other questions and comments?
I think the question from Sidhu is interesting. You have any take on that?
Need to change some part in the project, like adding tags, changing a particular component, but the project's very huge. How can we search for that part in the project? Ooh, oh my. I think that like navigating a large project, um, you really have to, I kind of talked about kind of people, right? When I talked about matching a project to your skills, right? So the people in the project and their goals and their needs and the type of help that they would want, right? Matching that with your skills and abilities, whether that's creating documentation, whether it's helping people in a forum, Discord, or discourse environment, um, whether it's taking a good first issue and trying to address it, right? It's really matching, right? Matching between people's in the project goals, right? And your skills. I think in this example here, it's very similar in the sense that you're always kind of matching between these, meaning you are starting, like you want to change a particular component, you're starting around a component that you maybe have, I assume you have some understanding of it, right? And then now you have to drive into increasing your understanding so that you can communicate to others that have interest in that component or that communication on tagging, right? That's kind of like, if that, I hope that answers your question, but it's really about this matching, right? Of like what you can know and learn about the project with what the project is in need of.
Like my thing is that, are there any searching tools for us to find that particular component in the project? As it is very huge, we need to navigate, right?
Yeah, and this is a challenge. So there are more and more tools coming available, especially using like large language models. We did Serge and I actually did a project together and there are many people that have done this type of project that would do embedded indexing on a GitHub repository and automatically attempt to answer your question as you rose a question in GitHub discussions. So there are some, and I bring that up as kind of fancy kind of answer to your question. And I'm sure there's people here that could share more like links about where you can use potential large language models to do questioning against GitHub. Those are fancy kind of tools and like indexing repositories. The kind of old school communication of tools, immediately I think of things like Swagger and open APIs, documentation. Documentation varies so much across software projects that this is a challenge in itself, right? And really that's what we're talking about when we say get into the documentation of the repository, right? And what people write about the project, what people put in the code of the project, and trying to understand it. I wish I have like a silver bullet answer for you on this, but I don't. The fact is that projects vary in their complexity and their understanding. And because software is such a communication oriented task, right? That we are communicating like we are writing, right? As we build software, but we do it in this mathematical way, right? Because that's what mathematics and object-oriented or functional approach to it. It ends up being like very could potentially concise and difficult to navigate and understand. So I would say that it would be important to flesh out like your understanding, go deep as you can as you're understanding the project, and then try to find a communication dialogue with others in the project where you can be helpful to them. And that is the best advice I can give, right? On navigating kind of the components, the tags, the specifics of a project like this.
There is a couple more things I can add, Pete, if you don't
Please.
mind.
Please
One of
do.
the things that we do is, Pete is absolutely right. This is very difficult. There is no like one silver bullet. But what tactics I have used in the past is, I mean, if you probably have to zoom out initially to what kind of project is this? This is a backend project. If it's a React project, then you know what React project looks like. It's going to have a specific structure to the project. Then you identify within the structure, most likely, not everybody does a good job. Most likely there will be packages in there. Packages will be descriptive enough to know, okay, this is based on this functionality. This model represents that bucket of functionality. So that's how we kind of slowly navigate towards. So let's say if you are trying to fix a problem that's related to some API, then you open a large code base, figure out where are those API classes located. Usually most of the project's going to have a specific package for that. Then once you identify that, then next thing I typically do is that, is there any automated test cases around them or documentation around them, like Pete said? If documentation, great, but 80% of the projects doesn't have good documentation out there.
Right.
Then second thing you look at is automated test cases. Do they have any unit test cases that can you look at? Because unit test cases usually tends to be a good source of documentation, how those APIs work. Then you go back what he was saying, definitely, if you're looking for it, if you're working on a specific issue through Tubelium, then you should definitely reply back or add a comment. Don't write in comment where I can find that code. Usually that's you're asking someone else to do your work. You can at least say, hey, I've navigated to the code base. I feel like I've identified this API package. I feel like this is where the issue is, but can you help me solve this specific or answer this specific question? Does that help you?
Yeah, it helps me. Thank you.
And I brought up some examples while Nilanjan was talking there too about like project like structure. Like if Python, they might use a PyProject tunnel, right? Next.js actually changed to an app router, app folder, right? Just in version 13, right? So they even changed the structure like underneath this, right? Last year. So yeah, it really kind of depends on the environment you're in. But surrounding the problem and that issue that Nilanjan's talking about is absolutely the way to go. Rajiv, you got another question? Hit us. People raise their
Yeah.
hands. Yeah.
So in these times, we have great SaaS products like Tublian to find suitable repo for us. But how do you find repo which matches your skill set? Do you use any tools?
To match like skill sets, you're saying?
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
what?
yeah. How do you
Yeah.
find a suitable repo for you?
How do I find? I'm sorry, I missed the word there. Find what? People?
Suitable repository.
A suitable repository to contribute to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Elanjan, you want to take that on the Tublian side? I know that that's a lot of what like Tublian does as far as helping in terms of community
Yeah.
and identifying open source projects.
Yeah. I mean, I think what Pete showed initially, I think that's the right way to do it, which is if you can find a project that you are actively using, it could be React, it could be some library, it could be some tool. And while using, you found some issues and you want to contribute to, that's probably the ideal way to go back to. That's why I have started. So one of the things that you can do initially with Tublian is that we optimize it for the breadth first right now, which is we expose you to the bunch of options. The idea here is once you play with a few repos, you will find not only the repository, the community that you like, and you become part of that community. So the tool itself is trying. I mean, I know it's not perfect, obviously, because it's a very difficult problem. It's already trying, looking at your profile data, already bubbling up projects relevant to your interest area. But that could end up, if you're interested in JavaScript, that might end up with hundreds of projects showing up. So, I mean, I would argue if you getting overwhelmed with it, we can definitely love to get your feedback and see how we can make that better.
I think that some of it is too. I mean, the best. Start with the projects that you find useful, that
Yeah.
you have used, and that's what's brought me into Python Panel, and start there. But you can also add on to it, right? Like, there's nothing stopping you from just creating your own repository, and just going that route, and then looking for others, right, to share the experience with. And don't, again, come with low expectations, no expectations even, when it comes to placing expectations on others. But bring high expectations to yourself, and go and have fun with it. Create a repository, start working on stuff. There's an awesome review there. Tublian's made my life easy. I love it.
Yeah, less of a question, more to tack on to similar things that were stated, at least in my experience, and I hope this isn't too controversial of an opinion. A lot of people who want to contribute to open source software are looking from the onset to go and contribute to open source software, where it can be a little bit like there's somewhat of an adage that I've heard before where you'll never find happiness if you constantly are looking for happiness.
Right, right.
And for me, the contribution aspect to open source software is similar, and it can be extremely difficult if all that's on your mind is what do I go contribute to, whereas it can be a lot more organic and feel a lot more fulfilling to just go leverage some open source software and come across that which irks you most and you think you could potentially do better or make a small improvement to, not just primarily to benefit your own usage, but whatever benefits you is bound to benefit a larger community as well. So that's my piece on that.
I think that's great advice, Max. I think that's absolutely right. I think that really, and that's really what I'm trying to communicate by like no expectations on the other people is basically like go and experience it, right? Like with your own like benefits. Like we are all like just hugely benefiting from open source software like every day, and that is created because of this kind of huge community and this huge trend in the marketplace. And I think that you're right on. Like if you're searching for happiness, it's going to be really hard to find it. It's really about like knowing yourself, right? And looking to help others, right, in the community. If it's beneficial to you, it may be beneficial to someone else. It's coming to them with trying to be helpful without expectation. Well, I have had so much fun like talking about this stuff with you guys today, and I really, really appreciate you guys spending an hour of your time with me today. You absolutely. I think somebody asked me about like Twitter. Like, definitely follow me. I'll follow you on Twitter. Um, Serge raised his hand. Get Serge up here. Serge, get that audio on.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello.
I saw a super nice question, and I was wondering your opinion about that. Someone asked, how can a community manager contribute? This, I think, is super challenging, and I like this question because I feel like a lot of developers are not that good, and even many open source projects, I think they are not that good as community. They try to create a community, but they are not always good, in communicating. And you show the importance of communication in open source. So how a community manager can contribute?
Oh,
What,
oh.
what is your opinion on that?
Okay, I'll give you my brief opinion, but then I want you to go into more detail. For those who don't know, Serge is involved deeply in two major open source projects and many actually open source projects. So I think that community management, communication. There's always been like, so if I go back in my career in software development, which is a long time, and because I'm old, and there has always been kind of business analyst roles in software development. There has been test, right? Manual testing. It's pushed more on the automation testing side with unit tests and UI test frameworks like Playwright and Puppeteer for those who are experienced with this stuff. My opinion is that community management kind of falls into those more traditional roles around business analyst and requirements and testing. They really require someone that wants to go curious and deep, right, into the technology and into the project that you're trying to do. Hey, do you mind muting, Steve? Hey, Steve, do you mind muting? Thank you. It was a good song though. Thank you. Go deep into the project and be able to communicate with others, right? About the project, right? Be able to answer questions, be a user of the project. This is, I think, what is super important from a community management perspective. And it's really understanding that goal and then sharing that goal with other people to better them, right? To better their involvement. Serge, what are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, and now I agree a lot with what you just said. Is really understanding what is the goal of the project and what the project does, but at the same time, I think is knowing who are the leaders and who are the right person in the project. For example, I like when people, you go to a forum or to a GitHub discussion and you see that no one is answering. It's good as a community manager to say, thank you for this question. I don't know myself, but you can ask, attack this person that you can answer. Be kind of the first interface to redirect all the requests through different platforms. And I think this is really a good contribution, in my opinion, in general. But yeah, I agree that this is something hard because I know that many developers don't recognize well this job, and it can be challenging.
It really has crossover effects into the documentation itself, right? You want a community manager that where they know the project, they know the people involved, they know the goals, they can redirect, right? The first time it comes in, the second time it comes in, you can actually point them right to that answer, right? So they're getting familiar with the project, and they're beginning to document, right, the project. That guy I mentioned on the Python panel project, Mark, you know, this is not his day job, but he's obviously just contributing a ton. He wrote like a book that's online. It's all open source too, called Awesome Panel, where people can learn panel and they can experiment with it using his projects that he's created. He's out there constantly answering. He, in my opinion, is like grade A, right? Like A++ community manager for Python panel.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, all the biggest project and the best project have a community manager and have a technical writer. So
Yeah,
everyone, don't underestimate this task, with really valuable for every single open source project.
absolutely. Very highly valuable. Great. Well, that 2 minutes over. Again, appreciate all of the time. Thanks everybody for coming out. Really appreciate it.